Chapter 1. The sun bled its last warmth across the spine of the world. Here, where the land crumpled into mountains and the sky felt close enough to touch, the great wall coiled like a sleeping dragon, its vast, undulating silhouette painted in the final, fleeting hues of day. First a wash of gold, then the soft, bruised plum of twilight, sinking at last into a deep and resonant indigo. The air, thin and sharp, carried the scent of distant pines and the clean mineral breath of stone that had baked all day, and was only now beginning to release its heat into the cooling evening. One by one, as if pricked by a silver needle, the first stars appeared in the darkening canvas above. Tucked within a hidden crevice, a fissure worn smooth by centuries of wind and frost, a small being stirred. He was Juan, an owl so ancient that time seemed to have forgotten him. His feathers were not the brown of bark or the white of snow, but the precise, ethereal color of moonlit dust, each barb and vein seeming to hold a particle of the night. When he shifted, it was not the rustle of a bird, but the whisper of sand falling in a forgotten hourglass. He was less a creature of flesh and feather, and more a spirit woven from the wall itself, a fleck of granite given life, a silent sentinel who had outlasted dynasties. He blinked, and his eyes, two pools of polished jet, opened to the deepening dusk. They did not merely see, they absorbed. They held the quiet gleam of millennia, a patient, knowing light that had witnessed the slow turning of the constellations and the steadfast march of seasons across the land. With a movement as soft as a moth's wing, he lifted from his stony alcove and settled upon his accustomed perch, the weathered crenellation of a watchtower that had long ago surrendered its roof to the sky. From this vantage, his gaze swept over the silent, moon-drenched landscape. It was a gaze that pierced through the present moment, listening past the sighing of the wind. Juan did not see the empty courtyards or the crumbling ramparts as they were now. He felt them as they had been, saturated with the echoes of generations. Upon the wind, he could discern the faint, rhythmic tramp of a soldier's worn sandals, the soft percussion of a heart beating with homesickness and duty. He felt the light, hurried footsteps of a messenger, his breath a plume of white in the cold, his message a desperate prayer clutched in his hand. These were the stories the stones held, the quiet hum of lives lived and dreams carried across the ages. Juan could feel the ghost warmth of a guard's hand rested on this very spot as he stared out at the encroaching darkness, thinking of his family in a village nestled miles away. He could hear the hushed whisper of lovers who had stolen a moment of peace in the shadow of the wall, their promises absorbed by the mortar and held fast against the erosion of time. Faint, ghostly peals of children's laughter seemed to rise from the base of the ramparts, where they had played games of chase while their parents toiled. And beneath it all, a constant, quiet sigh, the collective exhalation of those who sought solace here, who walked its length in contemplation, who saw in its staggering scale not a barrier, but a symbol of unity, a long stone ribbon binding a people together. These echoes were Juan's silent companions. His being was steeped in a profound, quiet contentment, a state of being that bordered on a gentle, knowing melancholy. It was the wisdom of ancient things, of mountains and rivers and stars. He embodied the patience of the wall itself, a deep, unhurried peace that came from understanding that all things pass, yet something essential remains. He carried the weight of ages not as a burden, but as a rich, textured cloak woven from the threads of countless human stories. It warmed him against the chill of the solitary night. The wall, in Juan's perception, was not a mere feat of engineering, a rampart against invaders. It was a living artery, a keeper of the human spirit. It breathed with the memories of those who had built it, their sweat and blood sanctifying the earth. It listened with the patience of those who had guarded it, their vigilance seeping into the very granite, and it dreamed with the hopes of those who had lived in its shadow, their yearning for peace and protection rising from it like a mist. It stood as a testament to quiet endurance, a monument not to war, but to the enduring desire for harmony, watching over a vast and slumbering land. The moon climbed higher, a perfect, luminous pearl, casting long, peaceful shadows that stretched like ink spills across the pale terrain. The world hushed, falling into the deep, restful slumber of the night. One, a tiny, ancient sentinel against the immensity of the cosmos, closed his eyes for a moment. In that darkness, he felt the thrum of it all, the whispers, the heartbeats, the silent dreams, the enduring stone. And so, as the world hushed, Juan opened his eyes again and began his quiet watch, inviting us to listen to the silent stories held within the stones, and perhaps within ourselves. Chapter 2. The moon, a polished coin of pearl, climbed the vast ink-dark sweep of the sky. Below, the ancient landscape drank in its silver light, every ridge and valley rendered in shades of phantom grey. Upon the weathered battlements of the Great Wall, How, a small owl whose feathers were the color of old smoke and winter dusk, shifted his weight from one talon to the other. The stone beneath him, cool and granular, held the day's last warmth deep within its core, a faint and fading memory of the sun. The air grew sharp, carrying on its current the clean, resinous scent of pine from the forested slopes and the mineral tang of distant sleeping earth. The wall itself stretched into the dimness, a long serpentine shadow, an infinite ribbon of human, were laid across the sleeping body of the world, its dark, formidable silhouette softened now by the tender wash of the luminous night. Hao's gaze, wide and gold, deepened. It moved past the surface of things, past the crenellations and the watchtowers, beyond the sheer fact of stone and mortar. He began to feel the wall not as a line of defense, a dead and static thing, but as a vast, breathing entity. There was a hum that vibrated up through his feet, a thrumming so low and profound it was more a feeling than a sound, the slow geologic beat of an ancient heart. The wind, funneling through the arrow slits, did not whistle or howl, it sighed. It whispered long, drawn-out notes that sounded like an old story being told in a language of pure memory, a recounting of seasons and sorrows that had long since lost their sting. He watched the moonlight, how it did not simply lie upon the stone, but seemed to seep into its very essence, filling the microscopic fissures and pores until the entire structure glowed with a soft internal luminescence, as if illuminating the wisdom held captive within its core. His mind, a quiet pool of ancient thought, drifted to the hands. Not the hands of emperors or generals recorded in scrolls, but the other hands, the countless, nameless ones. He could almost feel the phantom print of them on the stone, the calloused, determined hands of the laborers who had hewn these blocks from the mountainside, the gentle, fleeting touch of the women who brought them water in clay jars, their shadows long in the afternoon sun, the small, sticky fingers of children who had played games in the dust at its base, their laughter a bright, ephemeral thread in the grand, solemn tapestry. He sensed the silent prayers whispered into the mortar as it was laid, hopes for safety, for a good harvest, for a son to return home. The wall was not merely stone, it was a repository of human intention, a silent library of ordinary lives, of their simple, profound striving, their unrecorded loves and their quiet shared endurance. It was the collective spirit made manifest, less a barrier against enemies than a testament to the enduring power of people to build something together that would outlast them all. Howe considered this. He had seen conflict in his long, quiet life, the flash of fang, the brief, desperate flurry of a hunt. But the wall's strength was of a different order. Its formidable appearance was a deception. It had not fought, it had not raged. It had simply been. For century after century, it had held its patient watch, absorbing the searing heat of summer and the deep, silencing blanket of winter snow. It had borne the scouring wind and the lashing rain without complaint. This silent steadfastness, this long, quiet abiding, was a form of strength more profound than any battle cry. It was the gentle art of endurance, a peace found not in victory, but in immutable presence. Over these long ages, the wall had ceased to be an imposition on the land. It had become part of it. Howe ruffled his feathers, looking down at the place where stone met earth. Moss, as soft and deep as velvet, grew in the shaded crevices, cushioning the sharp edges. Lichen, in intricate, slow-blooming maps of pale green and sun-faded ochre, painted the grey faces of the blocks, telling their own silent story of time and weather. The wall no longer cut across the mountains, it flowed with them, rising and falling with the natural contours of the earth, its spine conforming to the ancient bones of the world. It was a thing not just built upon the land, but grown from it, a testament to the harmony that time alone can broker between the works of man and the patient embrace of nature. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled in their silent, majestic procession, Howe felt a subtle shift within himself. It was not a thought, but a quiet widening of his own ancient soul, an expansion of his understanding. The wall, in the profound stillness of the deep night, began to tell him a different story. Not one of battles and dynasties, of fear and division, but one of resilience. Its purpose was no longer to keep people out, but to hold memory within. It was a silent witness, its long winding form a vessel for the quiet, continuous unfolding of the world. It watched the slow dance of clouds, the migration of birds, the subtle season-by-season change in the starlight. Its true strength, he now understood, lay in its solemn, unending watchfulness. Howe closed his golden eyes for a long moment. He felt the weight of centuries resting in the stone beneath him, not as a burden, but as a deep and grounding presence, a stillness that absorbed all sound and haste. The air was cool on his face. The world was quiet. When he opened his eyes again, it was to the same vast, silent sky, the same moon sailing serenely through the heavens. But the peace he felt was deeper now, a resonant calm that seemed to emanate from the ancient stones themselves, a silent breath shared between him and the long sleeping dragon of the wall. Chapter 3. The moon had begun its slow, deliberate pour across the spine of the world. It was not a flood of light, but a patient seeping, an argent balm that filled the deep ravines and ancient scars of the wall. With a touch as tender as a sigh, it traced the veins of quartz that fractured the granite faces, making them gleam like threads of captured starlight. In the high passes, where the wind had spent centuries carving its psalms into the stone, the light caught on the sharpest edges, giving the sleeping dragon a silvered mane. On such a night, the hum began. It was a sound that had no sound, a vibration felt in the marrow of the stone, a resonance that was the aggregate of a million moments pressed into a single unending chord. It was the memory of sunlight on a summer afternoon, the echo of a winter gale, the infinitesimal shift of the earth's own turning heart. My awareness, a thing of mist and memory, drifted along this current of time. It settled upon a gentle curve of the wall, a place where the stone dipped low to cradle a shallow valley before rising again in a show of weathered defiance. Here, the hum was softer, imbued with the lingering warmth of lives lived in its shadow. I remembered the scent that would rise from the small stone dwellings nestled below, the soft, clean fragrance of herbs, chamomile and mint and lavender, hung from the rafters to dry, their ghosts perfuming the evening air. I remembered the sound of a lullaby, a wordless, wandering melody carried on the breeze from an open window, a thread of tenderness woven into the vast tapestry of the night. And after a cleansing rain, the small, flickering hearth fires would find their twins in the dark, trembling pools of water collected in the hollows of the path. Two worlds of warmth touching for a brief, shimmering instant. These were the echoes that gave the stone its soul. From the deep well of my existence, small vignettes would surface, not as sharp recollections, but as soft-edged impressions, rendered in the muted palette of things long past. There, in the buttery circle of a lamp's glow, a parent's hands. I could feel the worn, smooth texture of the child's shoe they held, the leather thin as parchment at the toe. The needle, a sliver of borrowed moonlight, moved with a quiet, practiced rhythm, in and out, a slow, deliberate suture of care. There were no words, only the whisper of waxed thread through tired leather, the gentle weight of a head heavy with sleep leaning against a shoulder, and the immense unspoken love contained in the simple, sacred act of mending what was broken. The hands, calloused from work but infinitely gentle in this task, were a testament to a love that did not need to be declared to be absolute. Further down, by the brooding shadow of a watchtower, another warmth. A small group of travelers, their faces weary from the road, huddled around a tiny fire. They were sharing a meal, nothing more than steamed buns and bitter tea, but their hushed laughter was a currency more precious than any coin. Steam rose from the bamboo basket, unfurling into the cool night like a prayer. It softened their features, blurring the lines of hardship etched around their eyes and mouths. For a moment, their burdens were set down beside their dusty packs. They were simply people, sharing the small, profound comfort of food and fire, and the quiet understanding that to be weary together is to be less weary alone. Their companionship was a shelter as real and as vital as the one they had crudely fashioned from branches against the tower's base. And then the solitary figure, a farmer, his back curved like the crescent moon, returning home at dusk along the well-trod path. In his basket was a meager harvest, a few pale roots, a clutch of hardy greens, the earth's spare offering. His steps were heavy with the day's labor, each one a mark of quiet endurance. But he paused, as I had seen him do so many times before, and tilted his head back to gaze at my form stretching across the horizon. His face, illuminated by the last vestiges of twilight, held no fear, no awe, only a deep and abiding familiarity. I was the landmark that meant his journey was almost over. I was the silent witness to his perseverance. In his eyes, I saw the reflection of the wall itself, a quiet, unyielding strength, a profound and simple will to continue. The moonlight played upon these memories, softening the harsh edges of history, creating pockets of deep, velvety shadow where sorrows could rest, and pools of gentle luminescence where kindnesses were held. The cool night air felt like a cleansing breath against my stone skin, and the distant, mournful cry of an owl was the only note in a symphony of silence. From the earth, still holding the memory of the sun, a faint warmth rose, an almost imperceptible exhalation of life. In the quiet contemplation of these moments, something within me shifted. It was a warmth that came not from a distant sun, but from within, a slow blooming in the ancient heart of the stone. I had always been a guardian, a watcher, but now I felt myself become a vessel. These quiet, unremarked acts of love, of companionship, of resilience, these were the true mortar that bound my stones together. They were the treasures I held, more precious than any emperor's gold. The wall was not a barrier to keep the world out, I mused as the moon climbed to its zenith. It was a library of whispers, a repository for the gentle, persistent and beautiful pulse of human hearts. And the hum that resonated through me was their collective song, a lullaby for the ages. Chapter 4. The moon hung at its zenith, a perfect polished disk of silver, and the light it poured upon the world was so potent it seemed to hum. It filled the gullies and the great sleeping valleys, clung to the gnarled fingers of ancient bristlecone pines, and fell like a fine, cool dust upon the wall. There, in a wind-worn niche carved from stone that had known 1,000 such nights, the old owl was perched. Through its talons, through the very marrow of its hollow bones, it felt the slow geologic pulse of the granite spine to which it was bound. The silence tonight was not an absence, not a void. It was a presence, a vast and resonant chamber, holding the echoes of every sound that had ever been swallowed by these high, lonely places. A current of air, a river of wind flowing from the dark peaks, brushed against the owl's feathers. It was a soft, insistent whisper carrying the scent of distant pines, the damp mineral tang of sleeping earth, and something more, a faint, almost imperceptible fragrance of wood smoke from a fire long since turned to ash. The scent was a key turning in a lock deep within the wall's immense slumbering consciousness, a memory, tender and specific, stirred from the sediment of centuries. It was not a grand recollection of clashing steel or the proclamations of kings, but something far quieter, something woven from the small, fragile threads of human warmth. The owl blinked its great dark eyes, and the world dissolved into a memory haze, thick and impressionistic as oil on canvas. The air tasted of frost. A small group of wall-keepers, their faces etched with a weariness that went beyond the day's labor, huddled in the lee of a newly built buttress. The wind, a keening thing, bit at the edges of their cloaks. In the center of their small circle, a single lantern cast a pool of trembling, honeyed light. Within that light sat a woman, her hair the color of spun snow, her knuckles gnarled like old roots. Her fingers, though, were nimble, possessed of a quiet, steady grace, as she worked a needle and thread through the thick wool of a soldier's torn cloak. She hummed as she worked, a low, meandering tune without words, a melody as soft and fragile as a moth's wing against the vast, crushing silence of the mountains. The owl remembered the sight, the sound, the feeling of it. It had watched from a perch much like this one, an observer unseen. The hum was not for performance, not for an audience, but for herself, a small charm against the immense loneliness of the night. Later, a bowl of broth was produced, steaming in the frigid air. It was a meager meal, thin and smelling of little more than salted water and herbs, yet it was passed from hand to frozen hand with a slow, deliberate reverence. No one spoke. Words were unnecessary, cumbersome things in the face of such simple communion. The warmth of the ceramic seeped into their palms, a fleeting comfort that was more than just physical heat. It was a shared acknowledgement of their mutual hardship, a silent promise of solidarity that glowed brighter than the flickering lamplight. The owl felt the ghost of that warmth now, a faint, pleasant heat blooming deep within the stone beneath its feet, a forgotten ember still aglow. And the owl considered this. Its long, long life had been a vigil over history's grand theatre. It had seen legions march until the ground trembled, had watched banners rise and fall like the turning of seasons, had heard the roar of sieges that cracked the very sky. Yet, as the centuries silted down, it was not the clamor of empires that had truly seeped into the wall's soul. It was this quiet mending, this shared supper, this gentle, half-forgotten hum. These were the moments that had become the mortar, binding the great stones together not with lime and sand, but with the unseen, resilient fibers of human connection. The owl's purpose, it felt, was shifting. It was not merely an observer of history's loud pronouncements, but the keeper of its tender, whispered secrets. Another flicker, another memory stirred by the passage of the wind. This one was bathed in the harsh, clear light of a summer afternoon. A boy, for he was barely more than that, his face smudged with dust and sweat, was fitting a stone into place. His hands, though young, were already calloused and broad, the hands of a man who worked with the earth. There was a profound concentration in his posture, in the furrow of his brow as he nudged the heavy block, testing its fit. It was more than labor, it was a kind of reverence. His touch upon the granite was not one of conquest, but of conversation. He seemed to understand in a way that defied words that this single stone, laid with such deliberate care, would outlast him, his children, and his children's children. It was his small testament against the unraveling of time. Before setting the mortar, he paused. His fingers, rough and stained, traced the faint weathered lines of a mason's mark carved into the adjoining stone. A simple spiral left by a hand from generations past. He did not know the name of the man who had made it, nor the story of his life. But in that moment, his touch was a bridge across time. It was a silent, shared acknowledgement of an enduring purpose, a quiet conversation between two souls who would never meet, yet who were bound together by the same monumental task. A new understanding settled upon the owl, as soft and profound as falling snow. The true strength of the wall was not in its staggering height, not in its formidable breadth, but in this, the accumulated weight of these small, unrecorded acts, the reverence of the stone layer, the weaver's gentle song, the shared warmth of a bowl of broth. These were the true foundations. The wall was not just a barrier of stone and earth, but a repository of human spirit, a vast library of quiet dedication. The owl's long watch was not over a fortification, but over this luminous, unseen legacy. The low internal hum of its own ancient life began to resonate with this deeper rhythm, a feeling not of isolation, but of profound belonging. As the moon began its slow descent, the first faint wash of dawn painted the eastern sky. The highest, most distant peaks blushed, turning from slate gray to a muted, ethereal rose. The owl closed its great golden eyes, not in sleep, but in a moment of deep and silent contemplation. The stones beneath it felt different now, less like a boundary, less like a scar upon the land, and more like a colossal living heart, still softly, patiently beating with the accumulated warmth of 1,000 forgotten kindnesses. Chapter 5. The air, which for hours had carried the small noises of the night, the skittering of unseen creatures, the whisper of wind across the parapets, now settled into a hush so profound it felt like the world holding its breath. This was the deep, crepuscular stillness that comes just before dawn, a pocket of time outside of time, a waning moon, a sliver of polished bone, hung low in the west, and its faint, silvered light did not so much illuminate the wall as paint it in memory and shadow. The great stones, worn smooth by 1,000 years of wind and weeping, took on the deep, bruised hues of indigo and slate. In an embrasure, a hollow carved for an archer who had turned to dust centuries ago, the ancient owl rested. It was a creature woven of moonlight and silence, its feathers the color of old stone and winter dusk. For millennia, its gaze had been sharp, a sentinel's stare that missed nothing and judged all. But tonight, something had softened in those vast amber eyes. The ancient, accumulated wisdom that resided there was tinged with a new and quiet wonder, a question that had only just learned to form itself. Its mind, a repository of silent ages, began to drift not to the grand events, not to the clash of phantom armies or the proclamations of forgotten kings, but to the spaces in between, a memory vivid and close enough to touch, unfurled like a scroll of the finest, softest parchment. It was the sound of footsteps, a rhythm played out across 1,000 generations, the soft, insistent shuffle of shepherds' sandals on the stone path that ran alongside the wall's base. The sound was accompanied by the gentle thud of hooves and the scent of lanolin and damp earth rising in the cool morning air. The owl remembered the quiet, melodic calls, whistled low and soft, that guided the flocks, a language of pure and simple function that was also, in its way, a hymn. Another memory bled into the first, a watercolor wash of color and scent. It was the sight of hearth smoke, thin gray plumes rising from the chimneys of distant, huddled villages as twilight bruised the sky. The owl recalled the faint aroma that would drift up on the evening breeze. Wood smoke, yes, but also the ghost of roasting herbs, of baking bread, of life settling in for the night. It was the smell of safety, of return, of a promise kept, a scent that spoke of a warmth the owl had only ever observed from its cold stone perch, yet felt now as a phantom heat deep within its breast. And then the memory of rain. Not a tempest, but a sudden, soft summer shower that descended without warning, hissing against the heated stones. Two travelers, strangers to one another, had taken shelter in the shadow of a watchtower. They did not speak. They simply huddled, their damp wool cloaks smelling of wet sheep and the long road, sharing a silence that was more companionable than any conversation. The owl had watched as one offered the other a piece of hard bread, a gesture made without preamble and accepted with a simple, grateful nod. The exchange was a universe of kindness in a single shared moment of discomfort, a fleeting warmth against the chill. As these memories, and 1,000 others like them, unfurled not in sequence but all at once, a profound realization began to blossom in the owl's ancient heart. It saw with a clarity that startled it. These were not isolated instances, these faint echoes of life. They were threads of light, of quiet resilience, of unspoken tenderness, and they had been weaving together for centuries. The pattern was intricate, luminous, and impossibly beautiful, and the wall, its silent stone companion for all these ages, was the loom. It had not merely etched these moments, it had been woven by them. The owl understood now. The mortar that bound the great stones was not just lime and sand, but the accumulated weight of shared silences. The stones themselves, porous with age, had absorbed the warmth of 1,000 dawns, the echoes of gentle laughter, the unspoken comfort passed between weary souls. The wall was not a line of division. It was a vessel, a monumental testament to the quiet, enduring spirit that flowed beneath the surface of history, cradling the small hopes and gentle joys of countless nameless lives. Its true strength was not in its height or its thickness, but in the echoes it held. In this dawning understanding, the immense, profound loneliness of the owl's long watch began to dissolve, the edges blurring like ink on wet paper. The feeling of separation, of being a solitary observer outside the current of life, gave way to a deep, resonant sense of belonging. It was a part of this. It had held vigil over the weaving. The owl's internal gaze, once fixed on the horizon, turned inward and then outward again, transformed. It no longer felt like a sentinel. It felt like a heart. A silent, feathered heart beating slowly within the great stone body of the wall. It was a keeper of these tender echoes, a guardian not of a border, but of a story, the immense quiet story of enduring connection. As the first pale blush of rose and gold began to touch the eastern peaks, the moonlight seemed to hesitate, lingering on the stones. To the owl's new senses, the light was no longer merely falling upon the wall, but infusing it, revealing a pulse that had always been there. The cold stone seemed to breathe, a slow, deep inhalation of the night, and an even slower exhalation into the dawn. And the owl, nestled in its worn hollow, felt its own slow breath fall into rhythm with it, a shared breath of eternity. Chapter 6. The dark before the dawn was a thing of substance, a deep and velvet quietude that held the world in a breathless pause. Upon a weathered battlement, where time had gnawed the edges of the stone into soft, rounded teeth, the owl sat. It was a carving come to life, a feathered sentinel whose existence was measured not in heartbeats, but in the slow, grinding turn of centuries. The air was cool and thin, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faintest, cleanest perfume of dew settling upon a million sleeping blades of grass in the valleys below. For so long, its vigil had been threaded with a subtle current of wistfulness, a ghostly ache for the lives that had flared and faded like so many brief candles beneath its gaze. It had watched the first stones being heaved into place, their raw grey faces staring defiantly at the northern steps. It had heard the murmurs of men with calloused hands and weary shoulders, their dreams and fears absorbed by the very mortar they mixed. It had seen soldiers pacing in the moonlight, their loneliness a palpable shadow, and later, the quiet footsteps of pilgrims tracing the serpentine spine of the world with a sense of wonder. But tonight, something had shifted. The wistfulness, that thin and silver thread of sorrow, had dissolved. In its place, a profound quiet settled, not of emptiness, but of fullness. It was the quiet of a library after closing, when the stories on every shelf seemed to breathe in unison, their collective soul filling the space. The owl had traversed the echoes, journeyed through the ghost prints of history, and had arrived not at an end, but at a deep and resonant understanding. Then came the first blush, a tender wound in the eastern sky. It was not yet light, but the promise of it, a fragile wash of rose and lavender that bled upward from the horizon. The mountains, which had been hulking, featureless shadows, began to breathe a soft sigh of awakening, their distant peaks catching the nascent color. The wall itself, a great sleeping dragon stretched across the land, began to stir from its slumber of shadow, revealing the ancient map of its skin, the crazed lines of age, the emerald velvet of moss in its deepest crevices, the subtle variations in tone from one dynasty's stone to the next. The light spun itself into golden threads, weaving through the ancient crenellations, spilling over the ramparts like liquid honey. It was a slow, deliberate unfurling, a masterpiece painted in real time. As the light grew, so did the sound. From the shadowed folds of the valleys, a faint chorus began, the tentative, melodic questions of the first awakening birds. The owl swiveled its head, its great amber eyes absorbing the transformation. It felt the first true rays of the sun touch its feathers, a warmth that was not merely heat, but a kind of benediction. The light traveled down its body, and beneath its talons, the stone began to lose its profound nightly chill. The rough granite, warmed by the new sun, felt like a living thing, a tangible link to the past. Each grain of rock seemed a silent whisper of a forgotten hand, a repository of sweat and toil and quiet resolve. And in that warmth, the final piece of the great puzzle slid into place within the owl's ancient consciousness. It saw it all now, not as fragments, but as a whole. The hands that built, the families that sheltered, the lovers that whispered in the shadow of a watchtower, the children who chased butterflies along. Its base, the modern traveler who rested a hand upon its surface in awe. They were not separate stories fraying in the wind of time. They were one, an unbroken, vibrant tapestry woven not with wool, but with echoes of laughter and shared hardship. with the shimmer of unshed tears and the sturdy plain thread of kindness. The wall, conceived in fear to create a barrier, had failed beautifully. It had not kept humanity apart. Instead, it had become a testament to its endurance, a grand serpentine clasp holding the story together. It was a line of connection, a shared memory etched into the very crust of the earth. The owl's solitary watchfulness had transformed. It was no longer a lonely observer of fleeting lives, but a quiet guardian of this immense secret symphony. It was a part of the tapestry, its silent presence a single, steadfast knot in the grand design. The air around it seemed to hum with the quiet music of timelessness, the vast and ancient quietude stretching to the horizon, no longer empty, but filled with the resonance of this unbroken thread. And so, under the tender gaze of the rising sun, the ancient wall stood, not as a barrier, but as a silent heart, pulsing with the echoes of every dream it had ever witnessed. And the wise old owl, its centuries of watchfulness now a quiet, profound peace, offered a soft hoot to the waking world. May you find your own quiet wisdom, and may your heart resonate with the beautiful, unbroken threads of connection that weave through your own life. Good night. What enduring truth or quiet connection has whispered to your heart recently? We invite you to share your thoughts, adding your unique thread to our shared tapestry of reflection.